In this video, I'm going to take a look at BRIGHTIN STAR's new ultra-fast 50. Not so long ago, if you wanted to try an ultra-fast 50, you had to spend a small fortune. But today, thanks to companies like BRIGHTIN STAR, you can buy ultra-fast lenses for far less money, and you can own a brand new lens specifically designed for digital sensors. Last year I reviewed BRIGHTIN STAR's 35mm lens, and I was very impressed with the results. So I was pleased when they asked me to review their new lens, which I can keep, while the conclusions in this video are all my own. I'll briefly cover the specs, the user experience, and then I'll discuss its performance, including the challenges and lessons learned from using such a fast lens. But before the specs, I thought it'd be interesting to show you what it's like to use an ultra-fast 50 by comparing how much light an f0.95 captures wide open versus slower fast 50s. Here's a shot taken indoors at night under artificial lights, so there's complete consistency of light. For the 0.95 wide open, I've manually set the exposure speed to achieve a well-lit image, and it's 1/25th of a second. It's not the brightest scene, but at 0.95, the BRIGHTIN STAR has no problems producing a nice light image. Then I switched lenses, and the models are listed on the screen. I kept the same exposure speed. Each lens is wide open, and the images are taken on a crop sensor mode to match the BRIGHTIN STAR. As you can see, there's quite a drop-off in light from the BRIGHTIN STAR to the next fastest lens, a Tomioka-made 55 f1.2. Interestingly, the next lens after the Tomioka, a Nikon 50 f1.4, doesn't seem to produce darker images than the f1.2. If anything, the image looks a little brighter. Comparing the two images, the f1.2's depth of field is clearly narrower, so from this perspective, the f1.2 definitely is a faster lens than the f1.4. What's happening here with the light is that the Tomioka's radioactive glass yellow tint is having at least a one-stop impact on brightness. So if you're going to spend a lot of money on an old f1.2 lens and it's radioactive, as a lot of them are, you may find it actually performs like a slower lens in terms of exposure. The new f0.95 has none of these issues. There's another big drop-off in light to the f1.8 lens, and again to the f2 and the f2.8 lenses. The conclusion from all this is that the BRIGHTIN STAR captures a great deal of light wide open. It's a valuable lens for low light situations, and it produces a very narrow depth of field and very smooth bokeh. Unboxing the lens, the design of the packaging, as others have pointed out, has more than a passing nod to the old Carl Zeiss boxes for Contax Yashica mount lenses. The lens itself is well made and has a nice solid all-metal feel. It's sizable, but not too heavy at 443 grams. It certainly looks the part as an ultra-fast lens, with that beautiful large expanse of glass at the front and the back. The lens is designed for APS-C sensors, and I can see the value of the design. The latest crop sensor cameras are very good and popular, and anyway on many full-frame cameras you can use the lens in a crop mode. Plus, 50mm on crop has a similar perspective to a film-era 75mm lens, so you're getting an ultra-fast portrait-style lens for your money. As a matter of interest, here's the coverage on a full-frame sensor, so though it doesn't cover full-frame, you can of course crop into the image in post-processing. Or occasionally, as I did here, find a composition where the vignetting doesn't show. The lens comes in two versions. My Sony E-mount lens is black, but if you own a Fujifilm camera, you can buy a silver body instead. I think it'll look very elegant on those cameras. The lens is available in these mounts. This is the lens's optical structure, and it has 13 aperture blades, a good number for retaining rounded bokeh bubbles as you stop down. It has a minimum focus distance of 0.5 meters, which I found was sufficiently close. If you want to get closer, you can always use extension tubes. The lens has a built-in hood, which is a nice touch, but I personally prefer a longer hood for very bright outdoor shots, and you can screw on a 62mm hood when the built-in hood is set back if you want. In terms of user experience, the lens balances well on smaller and larger digital cameras, but it did take me a bit of time to get used to the positioning of the aperture ring at the front. It's not very wide, and it's quite close to the focus ring. The first point to make about the BRIGHTIN STAR's performance is there's no doubting this ultra-fast lens's ability to dramatically smooth out busy backgrounds and foregrounds. The difference between stop-down images and wide-open images is amazing. With the right compositions and light, the bokeh is superb. It's exceptionally smooth and lovely. An extremely narrow depth of field can give you stunning subject isolation. I'll talk a little more about the quality of bokeh later. But rather than start with wide-open images, I'm going to show you the lens transitioning across all the stops, from f/16 to wide-open. At f/16, focusing on the flower's anthers, the lens is nice and sharp, especially considering the rather dim indoor light in this scene. I'll start opening up the aperture, and amongst other things, you can see the impact of those blades on the out-of-focus highlights. By f1.4, the lens is still producing a sharp in-focus image. This is a good result. I'm not sharpening these photos in post-processing, by the way. When we get to wide open, the image has what I think is a very beautiful soft glow. This is clearly a lens that's going to produce very dreamy, artistic style photos. Comparing the f/16 image with the f0.95 image, you can see just how much the lens is smoothing out the out-of-focus areas and producing large bubbles from the out-of-focus points of light. As we look at this image, there's one critical question that springs to mind. Is the lens sharp enough wide open on the in-focus areas to be usable? I think there are three things to consider about sharpness when you're using such an ultra-fast lens wide open. Firstly, you're going to be focusing on an extremely narrow depth of field, and it's very easy to miss the focus on both close-up shots and further away shots. This is a challenge for the photographer, and thank goodness with digital cameras, it really helps to have the ability to zoom into a scene to nail the focus. But you also need to use your discretion. It's better, when you want more sharpness, to stop down to f1.4 or f2 to produce an image where more of the scene is clearly in focus and the in-focus areas are sharper. The advantage of such a fast lens as this is that even when you stop down a few stops, then the out-of-focus blur remains attractively smooth. That's the challenge for the photographer, but then there's the challenge for the lens itself. With such a large expanse of glass at the front, pulling in a lot of light wide open, it's going to be a big challenge for the lens to concentrate that light and produce a sharp-looking image on the in-focus areas. Ultrafast lenses typically produce a glow around light in-focus areas. You don't need to be in extreme light situations to see this glow. For example, you can see it here on the in-focus lettering on this box. In fact, even at f1.4 you can see some of this glow, and this is quite normal for fast f1.4 lenses too, and the glow around in-focus areas definitely makes those areas appear softer. When you first try using a lens this fast, you may think it's simply too soft wide open, but then over time you'll find that the level of sharpness really does depend on the scene you're photographing. This shot, for instance, was taken wide open. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with the sharpness or rendering of the heron's head. It's easily good enough. Or this motorbike speedometer, where the numbers are clearly defined on this wide open image. There's a third thing to consider when using ultra-fast lenses, and that's the challenge facing the camera. On bright, sunshine days, I found that my camera, the Sony A7 Mark IV, the camera wasn't fast enough to cope with the lightest parts of the composition. For instance, this photo of spring blossom was taken at ISO 100, and the camera's top speed on manual of 1/8000th of a second, and the lens is taking in so much light, parts of the image are still overexposed. Similarly, on the Sony A6000, that has a maximum speed of 1/4000th of a second, some objects in some compositions are just too bright. In these situations, you need to stop down to handle the excessive light, or use a dark filter. When it comes to considering the quality of the lens's bokeh and blur, I'd make the same point as I made about sharpness, and that is you have to choose your compositions carefully for the best results if you're working wide open. In many cases it can be very dreamy and beautiful. But not all the time. Take these two images. I have mixed feelings about some of the blurred parts here. The way the camera body has been rendered almost has too much soft, undefined blur. And combined with the glowing lettering, it's not a particularly good photo to my eyes. And the same is true for these two yellow petals. They are quite close to the in-focus areas, but they lack a clear definition. They look too squidgy to me, if I could put it that way. In these situations, it can be better to stop down a little to f1.4 or f2 and produce some more details. Using such a fast lens, I was also intrigued by the bokeh bubbles the lens produces. One interesting feature of wide-open images is you don't always get to see a lot of distinct bokeh bubbles in the blurred areas, and that's because the lens's rendering is so smooth the light gets spread across the blur, like butter melting on hot toast. You can see this effect in photos I showed you at the beginning of the video. Slow lenses do capture bubbles behind the film camera, as I've circled on the screen, but not the 0.95. I've also taken images outside where you can't see a lot of clear bubbles at 0.95. Again, the points of light in the background have been smoothed out. It's only when you stop down that the bubbles become more apparent. Where there are very clear, distinct points of light in the background, such as these fairy lights, the lens does produce obvious bokeh bubbles at f0.95. Indeed, at the lens's minimum focus distance, the bubbles are large and attractive. They're larger than many other slow fast 50s I've used. And of course, as a crop sensor lens, this is further helped by the fact that you're looking at an equivalent 75mm perspective. I really like the bubbles in this image. I like their shapes and the artistic look of the overall effect. Plus I had fun playing with the camera settings to capture this strobe-like effect. This is straight out of camera. One other attractive feature for me for this lens wide open involves how it flares. The flares have interesting colours and shapes. Stop down more, the flares are not so noticeable. A less attractive feature of the lens, unless you love the colour purple, is the purple fringing produced against some very bright light situations, such as this classic sunlight in the trees image. This, however, is an extreme situation, and I took loads of photos with the lens in very bright sunlight, where the purple fringing is much less prevalent. On to using the lens as a portrait lens, where its crop frame perspective and the look of portraits taken wide open can work very well. Wide open, there is an attractive softness to the overall image, with a very dreamy background blur in the right scenes and light. This portrait is sharp enough on the face and glasses, but given the very bright background light pointing towards the lens, the overall effect is one of a rather lovely softness. This shot was taken wide open with the sun behind the camera, and the result is very well rendered. Here's another one with more of a side light. Again, a very attractive result, I feel, after I toned down the exposure levels in post-processing. And indoors, in low light, the lens has done a great job with capturing the details of the cat's face, although this also shows the dilemma of shooting at f0.95. You need to make a big decision on exactly what to focus on, because the rest of the image will be out of focus, or you may want to stop down to capture more details. When you do stop down, the lens can be brutally sharp for portraits, but still produce a nice background blur. Finally, for portraits, I know I'm a biased cat dad, but this photo, taken wide open on our bed, is rather beautiful, I think, a perfect result for an ultra-fast 50, gorgeously soft. Stopping down the lens to f5.6 or more, the lens is sharp, with quite contrasty details, but slightly muted colours, especially in sunny light. But you'd expect that with a lens with such a large front element. Given the amount of light passing through the front, even with the aperture blades stopped down at the back, it's not surprising the colours sometimes seem less vibrant in brighter conditions. I walked the lens around Chinatown in central London and took some photos of the Chinese New Year decorations and the people in the streets. Zooming in, the results are good, certainly good enough for a further crop if you want. I also used the lens in some really gorgeous early morning sunlight, and here are some colour and black and white photos from that day. I was impressed how the lens performed stop down. These scenes were too good to waste on a lens that couldn't handle the conditions, and the lens didn't let me down. I've enjoyed testing this ultra-fast BRIGHTIN STAR, and I'm in awe of the incredibly narrow depth of field and the beautiful blur the lens can produce. I think this is a lens you'll want to buy predominantly for ultra-fast wide-open photography and videography, because for stop-down images, it's competing against many other excellent but slower fast 50s. And as we've seen, there are significant challenges wide open to produce good images. For the photographer, the lens, and your camera. In fact, not just for photography, because it's a very creative lens for artistic-looking videography. But you're going to have to be very accurate and nimble with your manual focusing, especially with moving objects. To me, these are fun challenges, a true test of your compositional skills, settings, and focusing technique. So if you like a challenge and the kudos of owning an ultra-fast 50, I do recommend this lens. It's good value. The extra speed, even over an f1.2 lens, really does show up in the images. If you're interested in the lens, then there's an affiliate link below, and by using this link, you'll also be supporting my channel. Many thanks for watching. I look forward to reading your comments below, and until the next time, all the best.